The text came in just after I'd poured my morning coffee. It was one of those bright spring mornings where everything feels gentle, the light, the air, even the sound of the birds outside. I was standing barefoot in the kitchen I designed for them, the one with the warm cream tiles and the soft closed cabinets I'd splurged on because I thought Emily would like the way they whispered shut instead of slamming. I remember how the mug felt in my hand, solid, warm, dependable. I remember how quiet the house was. Then the phone buzzed, just one buzz, not a call, just a text. I picked it up without thinking. I was expecting maybe a recipe link from Marlene or a check-in from my cousin Walter, but it was from Emily, just one line. Hi, Eleanor, just wanted to give you a heads up before we post photos. We're taking the kids to the lake house this weekend. It's just going to be immediate family. Hope you understand. That was it. No wish you could come. No, maybe next time. Just a sterile courtesy message. A warning before the public saw what they didn't want to say to my face. I read it again. Immediate family. Not me. It's funny how betrayal doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it slips in quietly, wearing polite words and soft emojis. Sometimes it walks into your life through a text message while you're stirring sugar into your coffee. I stood there for a long time, the phone still in my hand, the message still glowing, the coffee cooled, the birds kept chirping, the light stayed golden and soft. Everything outside me remained calm, and everything inside me cracked wide open. You see that lake house? It was mine. Not in the legal sense, not anymore, but in the sense that mattered to me. I had paid for it. Every last board, every stone in the fireplace, every window that looked out over that quiet stretch of water. I'd gifted it to them last fall, wrapped in a ribbon of love and trust. I didn't do it for recognition. I didn't expect parades or speeches. I did it because I was their mother, and I thought that's what mothers do. We give, we help, we make space for others to grow, even if it means shrinking ourselves a little. But that message, it didn't just tell me I wasn't coming to the lake. It told me I was no longer considered immediate, that I was no longer essential, that I had been moved quietly, without conversation, to the outer orbit of their lives. I didn't cry, not right away, the kind of hurt that deep doesn't spill out. It sinks in, it settles into the cracks of your ribs and hollows out your lungs. Instead, I sat down, same stool where I used to slice apples for my grandson after school, same counter where Emily had once helped me roll out cookie dough, same kitchen, same light, but it all felt foreign, like I was visiting a museum of someone else's life. And that was the moment I realized I had built a home where I was no longer welcome. I had handed them keys to a life that didn't have a door for me anymore. It wasn't just the lake house, it was all of it. The birthday parties I used to plan, now held without me. The holidays I used to host, now replaced with Emily's family traditions. The decisions they made together, always informed by Emily's opinions and always relayed to me as afterthoughts. Little by little they had drawn a line, and I had kept stepping back from it, telling myself it was temporary, telling myself they were just busy, telling myself they still loved me. But now there it was, in writing, in black and white. They had made their life smaller, and I didn't fit in it. That night I didn't eat dinner. I didn't turn on the television. I sat by the window in the living room, the one that overlooks the garden, and I watched the light fade from the world. I didn't tell anyone. Not that day, not yet, because sometimes the first stage of grief isn't crying. It's disbelief, it's silence, it's staring at your hands and wondering how you spent your whole life building something that never saw you as part of it. I slept badly, woke up before dawn, and as I sat at the kitchen table, a cold cup of tea in front of me, I realized something I hadn't dared say out loud yet. This wasn't about a weekend trip. This was the moment I finally saw the truth. They didn't forget me. They excluded me, on purpose. Comment telling me which country you're tuning in from. It's incredible to see how far this community of wonderful people has grown, and I'm so grateful to be able to share my story with you. I used to call this house mine without thinking. The words would just tumble out, natural as breath. My kitchen, my garden, my window view. But standing in the hallway the morning after that text, I looked at the walls, at the paint I had chosen, the frames I had hung, the light fixtures I'd carefully picked out after hours squinting at catalogs, and I realized this was no longer my home, it was theirs, and I was living in it like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. It wasn't always this way. I remember the first time I walked through the empty frame of this place. It was just beams and drywall then, a skeleton of what would one day be a home. I'd worn boots and carried a thermos of coffee, and I'd stood there in the open space that would become the kitchen, already imagining where the table would go, which way the morning light would fall. This wasn't some generic gift. It wasn't a check and a card. It was a home, built with hands that still remembered how to hold a hammer, bought with money that had taken decades of saving. It was the biggest gift I had ever given, not because of the size, because of what I gave up to do it. I sold the house I'd lived in for 32 years, the one my husband and I had bought before we even had a proper couch, the one where I brought Thomas home from the hospital, where we hung his school artwork on the fridge, where we hosted Christmas dinners with plastic tablecloths and mismatched chairs. Every floorboard in that old place creaked with memories. Letting it go was like peeling off skin. But I did it. I sold it, cleaned it out, and packed away decades of my life into boxes, because Thomas and Emily needed a fresh start, because they wanted space for the kids, because I wanted to help. That was the story I told myself. That was how I justified draining my retirement account and cashing in the modest life insurance payout I'd quietly received after Raymond passed. I signed over the house in their names, free and clear, no mortgage, no monthly payments, just a deed and a dream. Emily cried the day we handed over the keys, big soft tears that made me believe I'd done something good. Thomas hugged me tight, tighter than he had in years, and said, "You saved us, Mom." I believed them. I wanted to believe them. Before they moved in, I came to the house almost every day. There was so much to do: painting, measuring, hauling, scrubbing. I kept busy, buzzing through empty rooms like a honeybee rebuilding a hive. The upstairs bathroom, I tiled it myself. My knees still remind me of those long hours, crouched over the floor, lining everything up just right. The curtains in the nursery, I sewed them on my old Singer, the same machine I'd used to make Thomas's Halloween costumes when he was little. I picked a soft powder blue, not because they asked, but because I remembered Emily once mentioning she liked calm colors. And then there were the small touches. The guest room quilt I bought on sale, but splurged on embroidery. The porch swing I had installed. The herb garden I planted along the kitchen window. Every little decision carried the same message: I want this to feel like home for you. And at the time I told myself I'd be part of that you, that this gift would bring us closer, that we'd cook together, that the kids would come into my room in their pajamas to ask for bedtime stories, that I'd be welcome at their table not as an obligation, but as a thread in the fabric of their daily life. But over time I started to notice things, subtle at first. The way Emily began referring to the house as our place in front of her friends, never including me in the phrasing. The way Thomas would brush off my suggestions with a polite, distant, "We've got it, Mom." The spare room that was mine slowly filling with storage boxes and donation piles. Eventually they moved the old elliptical machine in there too. The day I knew, really knew, that something had shifted was the afternoon I made my mother's beef stew recipe, the one Thomas always loved as a boy. I cooked all afternoon, let it simmer just right. When I brought it over, excited to share, Emily smiled and said, "Oh, we just ordered Thai, sorry, maybe you can freeze it." She didn't mean it cruelly, but the knife landed anyway. That night I sat in the living room alone, the bowl of stew untouched beside me, and I started to wonder, where do you go when you're no longer needed in the place you built? Not just the walls but the very foundation. That question sat heavy on my chest in the days that followed. I didn't yet know what I was going to do, but I knew something had broken, and once you see the crack in the glass, you can't unsee it, no matter how clean the window. It's strange how easily we confuse the two, being needed and being loved, especially when you've spent most of your life giving, especially when giving is the only language you've known. Looking back, I can see it now, the quiet pattern that had been forming for years, the favors that started small, the phone calls that only came when they wanted something, the gentle manipulation tucked between thank yous. I told myself it was love. I wanted to believe that the late-night texts asking, "Mom, could you watch the kids tomorrow?" were signs of trust, not convenience. That the requests to help with Emily's paperwork or pick up groceries while they were so swamped were signs of closeness, not dependency. I remember one year I had been planning a trip with an old friend of mine, Justine. We were going to drive up the coast, stay in little bed and breakfasts, eat seafood, maybe catch a show. I hadn't done anything like that since my husband passed. I even circled the dates on my calendar and taped a brochure to the fridge. 2 weeks before we were meant to leave, Emily called. "We're in a real bind," she said. "Thomas has a conference, and our sitter just canceled. Could you help out just for a few days?" I canceled the trip, just like that. Took the brochure down and threw it away. I told myself it was no big deal. That's what mothers do. But it was a big deal. Not because of the trip, but because of the silence that followed. No one ever asked what I gave up. No one ever noticed that I didn't reschedule. No one ever said thank you in a way that sounded like more than a formality. I kept showing up, not out of duty, not anymore, but because I was afraid of what might happen if I stopped. Afraid that if I stopped being useful, I'd stop mattering altogether. And maybe I was right. There were nights, more than I'd admit, when I'd cook dinner and wonder if anyone would notice if I wasn't there. If I stopped folding laundry, stopped picking up toys, stopped replenishing their pantry with toilet paper and paper towels, would anyone even ask where I'd gone? Being needed gave me a place in their world. But being loved? That would have meant I was wanted even when I wasn't useful. That I could sit still and be seen. That I could show up empty-handed and still be welcomed. That was never the case. It became clearer every time Emily thanked me with her eyes already on her phone. Or when Thomas would smile distractedly and say, "You're a lifesaver, Mom," and then disappear into his office without even asking how my day had been. I started telling myself little stories to make it okay. They're tired. They're busy. They're still young. They'll appreciate me later. But deep down, I think I knew. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes when you're surrounded by people who rely on you but don't really see you. I remember one night, it was raining, heavy, steady rain, the kind that taps against the window like a reminder. I'd made a pot of chili. Thomas and Emily were in the next room, arguing softly about something. I couldn't make out the words. I stood in the kitchen doorway for a long time, holding 2 bowls, one for each of them, and I waited. Waited for the argument to end. Waited for someone to notice me standing there. Waited for someone to need me again. Eventually, I just set the bowls down on the counter and went to bed. I didn't even eat. The silence that night was heavier than the rain. That was the night I admitted something to myself. They don't check in unless I check first. They don't ask unless they want something. They don't come to me for comfort, only for convenience. I wasn't a mother anymore. I was a service, a support system, a safety net. And if I ever stopped providing, I would disappear from their lives like steam from a cooling kettle, slowly, silently, and completely. I had loved them with the kind of love that bends, that stretches itself thin to hold everyone up. The kind that says yes even when it aches. The kind that puts itself last so someone else can rise. But love without respect, love without care, that's not love at all. That's duty, that's fear. That's something you do to avoid the crushing realization that you gave your heart to people who only ever wanted your hands. The lake house was never the real issue. It was just the moment the fog lifted, and I saw finally what I had become, and what they had allowed me to be. It was a Thursday morning, quiet, uneventful, the kind of morning you forget unless something happens to make it unforgettable. I had just finished making the beds. The kettle was starting to whistle when I noticed my phone screen light up on the counter. One message from Thomas. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, reached for the phone, and unlocked it without thinking. "Hey, Mom, just confirming the final plans for this weekend. It'll just be us and the kids at the lake. Emily feels it's important to have a family-only weekend. Hope you understand." No punctuation at the end. No wish you could come. No we'll see you soon. Just that cold little sentence. Emily feels it's important to have a family-only weekend. I must have read it 5 or 6 times. My thumb hovered over the screen, expecting more, waiting for a second message, the one that would say, Just kidding, of course your family or will miss you so much. But nothing came, just silence. And in that silence, something inside me shifted. It wasn't a loud feeling, not rage, not even sorrow. It was quieter than that. A soft, sinking certainty, the kind that settles in your bones before your brain even has time to name it. They had made a decision. They hadn't forgotten me. They hadn't made a scheduling mistake. They had deliberately chosen to go without me, to spend a weekend in the house I bought, under the roof I provided, on the land I gifted, without the woman who gave it to them. Not as an accident, as a plan. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. Then I set the phone down carefully beside the kettle, which was still whistling, a sharp, keening sound that seemed to echo what was happening inside me. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. There was something about that moment that felt too fragile, like a porcelain plate that's cracked in the middle but hasn't shattered yet. One wrong word, and the whole thing would break. 5 minutes later, a second message came. This one was from Emily. Hi, Eleanor. Just wanted to follow up on Thomas's message. I really hope you understand. It's just simpler this way. We'll catch up when we're back. That was the one that did it, not the exclusion, not even the certainty in her tone. It was that word simpler. It's just simpler this way. Like I was a piece of clutter, an old lamp or a dusty photo frame that no longer fit their aesthetic. Like my presence, my love, my effort, my very existence, complicated things. Simpler. That word didn't just sting. It cut, not with a sharp blade, but with a dull, grinding edge. The kind that wears you down slowly, until you don't even realize you've been bleeding all along. I stood there for a long time. The kettle finally stopped screaming. The house fell quiet again. But I wasn't the same woman who had entered that kitchen. I poured the water into my cup, watched the tea leaves swirl, and let the silence wrap itself around me. Then slowly, deliberately, I picked up my phone. I typed just one word. Okay, and I hit send. It was a small word, harmless looking, but I knew what I was really saying. I wasn't agreeing. I wasn't understanding. I was drawing a line, and behind that one-word reply, there was a storm brewing. It wasn't the kind of storm that throws furniture across the room or slams doors. It was the kind that clears the air, that washes away years of fog, and lets you see exactly what you've been standing in. For the rest of that day, I moved through the house like I was floating. I dusted picture frames that suddenly looked like strangers. I folded laundry that felt like it belonged to someone else's life. I made dinner. I didn't eat. And when night fell, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the lavender paint on the walls seeming to press in on me. They didn't see me as family. Not really. Family doesn't exclude you from joy. Family doesn't take your kindness and call it a burden. Family doesn't make things simpler by removing you. I had spent years telling myself I was part of something, that I was woven into their lives, with the same thread of love I had given so freely. But now I knew better. They didn't want my presence, just my provision. They wanted my name on the deed, not on the guest list. And that truth, spoken through the quiet of a kitchen, a cup of tea, and 2 short text messages, would become the starting point of everything that came next. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was crying or pacing the room. I wasn't. I just lay there, flat on my back, eyes wide open in the dark, feeling something shift under the surface, something I hadn't let myself look at until now. It was like a splinter had finally worked its way up to the skin, and there was no ignoring it anymore. I kept replaying Emily's message in my head. It's just simpler this way. And Thomas's cold, practical tone, just confirming, like I was a piece of paperwork, a schedule line item. Around 2 in the morning, I sat up in bed. The house was completely still. I walked barefoot down the hallway, the floor cool beneath my feet, until I reached the little alcove off the kitchen, what they called the office nook. My old laptop sat on the desk, closed, dusty, unused. For a long time, I had let Emily take over the finances. I started with small things. Let me pay the electric bill online, it's quicker, she'd say. Or I'll just log into your account for the cable bill. No need to fuss with paper checks. At the time, I was grateful. It felt like someone was helping. But now I felt something else entirely. I sat down and opened the laptop. The glow of the screen felt too bright, almost blinding in the quiet dark. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. For a second, I wasn't sure I even remembered my password. But I did. I typed it in, and everything came flooding back. The bank dashboard loaded. I hadn't looked at it in months. Not really. Not past the surface numbers. Now I did. I opened the transaction history, and I began to scroll. At first it all looked familiar. The direct deposit from Social Security, the occasional grocery run, the cable bill. But then, small charges. Quiet ones, $87, labeled as landscaping. $142, home maintenance. $76, pest control. All neatly categorized. All made to look routine. But I hadn't scheduled any landscaping. The last time I called a handyman was over a year ago. And pest control, I'd paid for that annually, in full, with a check. Not in small monthly drips. I kept scrolling. $250, $98, $63, all slipping quietly out of my account, dressed up as chores and errands, designed not to raise alarms, spread out over weeks, then months, hidden in the noise. A coldness settled in my chest. Not shock. Not yet. Just a creeping, numbing sense of violation. Then I clicked over to account access. That's when I saw it in plain, unforgiving type. Authorized user, Emily Carter. She had full access. And not just to pay bills. She could transfer money. She could open credit. She could drain everything, and I'd never know. My mouth went dry. I scrolled further. There it was. The authorization. Dated. Filed. Processed. Attached to it a scanned document. My signature. Suddenly I remembered the day she brought it over. She'd walked into the kitchen holding a folder. Smiling. Bright. It's just a formality, she'd said. Power of attorney stuff. In case something ever happens to you. I'll never use it unless I have to. Promise. She'd even brought a notary with her. I remembered laughing nervously as I signed, thinking, well, at least someone will be able to keep track of things, if I get sick. I hadn't read the fine print. I hadn't wanted to, because I trusted her, because she was family, because she was married to my son. The screen blurred for a second, and I realized I hadn't blinked in what felt like minutes. I closed the laptop. My hands were steady, but my world was not. The illusion, that soft, comforting lie I'd wrapped around myself for years, had finally torn open. This wasn't about a forgotten invitation. It wasn't even about hurt feelings. This was about theft. About a deliberate, methodical erosion of my security, of my trust, of my autonomy. And the worst part, they'd done it while still calling me Mom. They'd stolen from me with a smile, with thank yous, with "we couldn't do this without you." I sat there for a long time, staring at nothing. Then I reached for the notepad by the phone, the one I kept for grocery lists and prayer reminders, and wrote down one word in all capital letters. Liar. It wasn't anger I felt. It was clarity. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't being sensitive. I was being robbed. And I was done being quiet about it. I didn't sleep at all that night. When the sun finally rose, pale and reluctant behind the kitchen blinds, I was still sitting in the office nook, my notepad beside me, the word all-wire circled 3 times. I'd always thought of myself as someone who avoided conflict, the kind of woman who brought a pie instead of a complaint, who forgave things too easily, too quickly, in the name of family, in the name of peace. But that morning I felt none of that. No trembling, no panic, just stillness, like the inside of me had gone quiet, not empty, focused, like a room after a storm when all the furniture has been cleared and you can finally see the corners you've ignored for years. By 7 a.m., I had showered, dressed, and pulled out a manila folder where I kept old financial records. I clipped the printouts of my bank activity. Then I picked up the phone and called an old acquaintance. Walter Jensen, the estate attorney who helped me sort through Raymond's will years ago. He still answered with that deep, unhurried voice I remembered. "Walter? this is Eleanor Carter. I need to schedule a meeting, today, if possible. It's urgent." He didn't ask why. He just said, "Come in at 10, and so I did. I walked into his office with the folder hugged close to my chest, sat across from him in a leather chair, listened to the soft tick of the clock behind his desk while he read everything I handed over. When he finished, he looked at me, not with pity, with something closer to respect. "Well, Eleanor," he said, his fingers steepled in thought, "from what I see here, this isn't just mismanagement. This is calculated. This is control. This is elder financial abuse." The phrase landed with a soft thud. I nodded. "I know. Do you want to reverse the gift of the house?" he asked. "Yes." "Freeze access to the bank accounts?" "Yes." "Change your power of attorney?" Immediately, his pen began to move across a yellow legal pad. Every scribbled note felt like a brick going into place. A wall, a boundary, a home, not for them, but for me. I had given away everything. Now I was taking it back, one signature at a time. He slid a document across the table. "We'll need a formal petition to reverse the deed transfer. It's not easy, but in cases like this, with evidence of manipulation, it's possible." He looked up at me. "You understand what this means, right? That they'll hate me?" He didn't answer. I did. "I'm not afraid of being hated anymore, Walter. I've been invisible for years. What I'm afraid of is disappearing completely, while they smile and tell me everything's fine." That afternoon I met with my financial advisor, the same man who'd handled my modest investments for decades. He confirmed everything, showed me the trails, the slow, steady siphoning, the quiet withdrawals, the passive erosion of what I had built. "She's been moving small sums into an investment account under her name," he said, tapping the screen, "under the durable power of attorney." I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just said, "Shut it all down. Every card, every account. Freeze it, open a new one, just for me. And no one else gets access." He nodded, understood, and then almost as an afterthought, he added, "You may want to consider hiring a private investigator." At first, the idea felt absurd, like something out of a movie. But then I thought about Emily's cheerful voice as she handed me that first power of attorney form, her bright smile, her insistence it was for my protection, and I knew this wasn't just about my accounts. It was about control. It was about erasing me, one legal form at a time. "Find someone you trust," I said, "and send them my way." 2 days later I met him. He was polite, quiet, professional. He took notes while I spoke. Didn't flinch when I handed him the documents. Just said, "I'll find out what they've been planning." And with that, the final piece clicked into place. I wasn't preparing for a confrontation. I was building a fortress, brick by legal brick. Boundaries, locks, walls. But not to keep the world out. To keep me in. Safe, steady, whole. For years I had been the foundation of other people's lives. Now I was finally laying the foundation of my own. He came back on a Sunday morning. I already knew the time their flight would land. I knew the route they'd take from the airport. I even knew the make and model of the rental car they'd left at the house. They'd texted me the code to feed the cat, as if I were just the house help. What they didn't know was that it wasn't their house anymore. Not legally, not emotionally, not in any way that mattered. I was already there when they arrived, parked a block down under the old elm tree where the neighbors hang their 4th of July banners every year. The moving truck was idling in the driveway. 2 young buyers, polite, freshly married, still glowing with the innocence of hope, were walking through the front yard with the real estate agent, smiling at the rose bushes I'd planted years ago with Emily, back when I believed that planting something together meant you'd grow together too. I watched the SUV turn onto the street, and slow. They saw the truck first, then the strangers, then the unfamiliar car in the garage, and then me. I stepped out of my car, calm, composed. The sun was behind me. I wanted them to have a clear view. Thomas was the first to open the door. He stood by the car like he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. Emily's door opened slowly. She stepped out with a wary, narrowed stare, the same expression you might give to a stray dog near your porch. Disgust and calculation all in one. She spoke first. What is going on here? Her voice was sharp, controlled. I took my time walking up, stopped just at the edge of the lawn. Well, Emily, I said, I suppose you won't need to worry about managing things for me anymore. Her jaw clenched. Thomas looked confused, genuinely so, like a man who had no idea which part of his life just fell apart. Mom? He asked. What's going on? I reached into my bag and pulled out the legal folder. Neat, thick, final. These, I said, handing it directly to him, are the only papers that matter now. He took it with trembling hands. I watched him read. The reversal of the deed, the new trust, the fraud report, the investigation notes. He flipped page after page, his face draining of color. Emily tried to snatch the folder from him, but I held up a hand. I wouldn't, I said quietly. Her face twisted. You can't do this. This house is ours. We're refinancing. I interrupted. You were refinancing. Thomas spoke again, voice soft. You sold the house. I met his eyes. No, I reclaimed it. And then I sold it. Emily was shaking now, her voice louder, shrill. You have no right. I had every right, I said, because you took what wasn't yours. You used my money, my trust. You drained my accounts while I folded your laundry. She opened her mouth again, but I took a step forward, calm, deliberate, and looked only at Thomas. I am your mother, Thomas, and I gave you everything, everything, and you let her turn that gift into an open wound. His mouth trembled. He tried to speak, couldn't. Emily scoffed. So what now, Eleanor? You feel powerful? You think you've won? I turned to her. This was never about winning. This was about seeing clearly. And now I do. She laughed, a hard, bitter sound. Fine, take the house, take your revenge, but you'll be alone. That's all you've earned. A sad, empty little life. I looked at her, really looked, and I saw it. The fear, not of being punished, but of being exposed. You're wrong, I said gently. I'm not alone. I'm free, and there's a difference. Then I turned to Thomas one last time. I hope one day you understand what it cost me to walk away, but I hope more that you understand what it cost me to stay. And with that I walked back to my car. I didn't rush. I didn't cry. I didn't look back, because you only look back when there's something worth mourning. And all that was left behind me now were empty rooms and emptied intentions. I left them there, on the curb, with their overpriced luggage and their underfed guilt. I left them with the pieces of a life they thought they could build on my silence. But I had finally found my voice, and she wasn't whispering anymore. I moved into my new apartment on a Monday. No fanfare, no welcoming committee, just a few boxes, a borrowed dolly from the building manager, and the quiet kind of sunlight that slips through blinds and makes everything feel clean again. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, carpet that's seen better days, cabinets that creak, nothing fancy. But it's mine. I picked out the paint for the bedroom myself. A soft green, not the kind you find in magazines, but the kind you see in moss after a spring rain. The living room is mostly empty, save for my old rocking chair, a small dining table, and my mother's china tucked neatly in the cabinet. There's no guest room full of storage boxes, no elliptical machine parked in the corner of my space, no schedules I didn't agree to, just me. And for the first time in years, that's enough. The first night I slept here, I expected to feel lonely, but I didn't. I woke up before dawn, as usual, and made tea. I sat by the window, watched the sky soften from blue-black to lavender-gray, and felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Stillness. Not the stillness of being forgotten, the stillness of peace, of safety, of having nothing left to prove. Later that afternoon, I unpacked the last of the boxes, old photo albums, my husband's watch, a stack of dog-eared books. I lined the bookshelf carefully, one memory at a time. There's a photo of Thomas as a toddler, all curls and dimples, grinning at a birthday cake I baked from scratch. I placed it on the shelf. It doesn't hurt to look at it. Not anymore, because that photo holds a moment of real love. A version of us that was true, before time and distance and entitlement hollowed it out. And I don't have to erase those memories to move forward. I just have to stop mistaking them for permission to stay. That evening, my phone buzzed on the table. A text from Thomas. Mom, please. Can we talk? I stared at the message for a long while. There was no rage in me, no urge to reply, no ache to fix it. Just a quiet understanding. He wasn't reaching out because he missed me. He was reaching out because the support system had collapsed. A few moments later, another message arrived. Emily went too far. I didn't know everything. Please don't shut me out. It would have broken me once. But now it just confirmed what I already knew. He wasn't sorry for what they'd done. He was sorry he'd lost the life I paid for. I placed the phone down, screen facing the table, and walked to the kitchen. Dinner was simple, lentil soup and buttered toast. I ate at the table with the window open, the sound of children playing in the distance, floating up on the wind. It made me smile. That sound, laughter not meant for me, not directed at me, didn't sting. It just reminded me that life goes on. That joy still exists, that even when you feel emptied, there's always something left in the world to make you full again. Later that night, I stood in the doorway of my bedroom, looked around at the freshly painted walls, the unmade bed, the slippers by the chair. No one needed me, no one was asking anything of me, and I had never felt more whole. I thought about everything I'd given, and everything I had taken back. I thought about how quiet the betrayal was, and how quietly I rebuilt myself. No drama, no screaming, just the steady, deliberate process of reclaiming what was mine, not just the house or the money, but my self-respect, my boundaries, my identity. They always thought I couldn't live without them. And for a long time, I thought they were right. But the truth is, I was never lonely, because I was alone. I was lonely because I wasn't seen. Now I am. By me. And that is enough.